Long before the modern world became accustomed to precision missiles and drone warfare, there was a time when fire itself was the most feared weapon on the battlefield. It wasn't the sharpness of the sword or the weight of the hammer that haunted a soldier's dreams, but rather the roar of flame, the stench of burning flesh, and the slow, agonizing death that fire could bring. Medieval warfare was brutal, but the introduction of incendiary weapons turned brutal into nightmarish. Fire in combat was not a new idea. Ancient armies used flaming arrows and burning pitch, but it was in the medieval period that incendiary tactics evolved into terrifying strategies. The Middle Ages saw the refinement of fire as a psychological weapon, one not only meant to destroy but to terrify, to scatter, and to force surrender without mercy. From the scorching oil poured from castle walls to the flaming pots hurled by trebuchets, these methods were not just about damage, they were about fear. Imagine standing beneath a looming stone fortress, knowing that at any moment boiling oil could rain down on you, seeping into your armor, blistering your skin, making every breath a scream. Or picture being inside a wooden outpost when an enemy fireball crashes into the walls. The structure around you begins to crackle and moan as flames consume it. There is no heroic clash of swords here, only the dread of suffocating smoke and unbearable heat. Medieval armies quickly realized that fire was the ultimate equalizer. You didn't need a massive army if you could set your enemy's fortress ablaze. One well-placed incendiary strike could cause chaos among ranks, spark panic, and collapse defenses. Siege warfare in particular embraced fire with open arms. Soldiers launched Greek fire, a mysterious flammable substance that could burn even on water from large siphons. This ancient invention, possibly dating back to the Byzantines, was so feared and so effective that its exact composition was guarded like a royal secret and remains unsolved even today. Greek fire wasn't just a weapon, it was a psychological nightmare. It hissed, it stuck to skin and clothing. And it wouldn't go out with water. It was the medieval napalm. In battles, it caused more than just physical harm, it shattered morale. City defenders watched helplessly as their moats caught fire. Their ships blazed on the water, and their comrades burned while screaming in agony. But it wasn't only empires with Greek fire who wielded flame as a weapon. Peasants too found ways to incorporate incendiary tools in rebellion. They would craft fire arrows, soak rags in tar, and launch them at manor houses, haystacks, and grain stores. Economic sabotage through fire became a way for the powerless to strike back, and though crude, these methods were often devastating. Fire did not distinguish between king and commoner, and that made it a great equalizer. Then there were fire pots, fragile clay containers filled with pitch and sulfur that would explode into flames upon impact. Used during sieges, they could be hurled by hand or through catapults, landing with a terrifying hiss and explosion. Even the fear of these weapons could lead defenders to surrender without a single blow being struck. The reputation of fire preceded it, and with good reason. Entire towns were sometimes threatened with destruction by fire if they did not comply. Many chose submission rather than face the unbearable heat. Flame had become a tool not just of war, but of diplomacy, of dominance and submission. And of course, religious wars and crusades added another layer to this fear. Fire took on a spiritual terror seen as divine punishment or wrathful purification. Some invaders used fire deliberately on churches or sacred places, not just to win a battle, but to erase a culture. Medieval chronicles are filled with accounts of villages torched, monasteries burned, and libraries lost forever to the flame. The destruction of knowledge and culture was not collateral, it was intentional. Fire had become the enemy of memory and legacy. In this era where few could read, the loss of a single illuminated manuscript was like the silencing of 100 voices. There was, however, no protection from the chaos once fire started to spread. In medieval times, Firefighting was nearly non-existent. A burning building was left to collapse in on itself. Neighbors would sometimes try to tear down adjoining walls to create a fire break, but often they fled, hoping the wind would be merciful. Entire towns built of timber and thatch could disappear in hours. A single flaming arrow could destroy what generations had built. Fire was not just a weapon on the battlefield, but a terror in daily life, a looming threat above every hearth and marketplace. The fear of fire shaped architecture, city planning, and even law codes. In many medieval towns, fire regulations became strict. Chimneys were mandated. Fire watchmen patrolled at night. Heavy fines were placed on those who endangered public safety through carelessness. Yet in war, none of that mattered. Fire was unleashed without restraint as an instrument of chaos, one that turned victories into ashes and defeat into despair. Those who lived through firebombed sieges often carried physical and emotional scars for life. The heat, the screams, the scent of burning, it never truly left them. In many cases, survivors spoke little of it, as though remembering was too painful for words. As though fire had consumed not just walls, but pieces of the soul itself. And so medieval warriors feared fire not only for what it could do, but for what it meant. It symbolized annihilation, cleansing, terror, and cruelty. It was unpredictable, uncontrollable, and often unfair. It was a reminder that in an age already full of blood and brutality, there was still a greater horror lurking above the battlefield, one that danced in orange tongues and whispered promises of suffering. The fear of fire was not just physical. It was cultural, emotional, and spiritual. And it would only grow in the coming centuries. As the medieval world marched forward, so too did the innovation of fire as a weapon. What once began as flaming arrows evolved into calculated tools of terror designed to break armies and cities alike. With each passing century, the fear of fire grew deeper, not just as a danger of nature, but as a reflection of mankind's cruelty and creativity. In medieval sieges, fire became a routine part of planning. A well-supplied army would come prepared with pitch, sulfur, oil, tar-soaked cloth, and the engineers to build siege engines capable of launching these deadly tools over walls. But fire wasn't only hurled from the outside. Inside city walls, defenders prepared their own incendiary tactics. They heated sand to blistering temperatures and dumped it on climbing attackers. They built flame traps within gates, ready to set whole drawbridges alight if breached. The battlefield itself became a place where fire changed the strategy. During open combat, commanders began using scorched earth tactics, setting their own fields and villages on fire to deny enemy soldiers food and shelter. Some even used fire to herd enemy cavalry into narrow valleys or ravines, surrounding them with flame and smoke, until panic and confusion sealed their fate. Horses especially feared fire. A single burst of flame could cause an entire cavalry unit to scatter, turning a precise charge into chaotic retreat. That fear was weaponized. Flaming stakes were placed around encampments. Torches were tied to animals and sent running into enemy lines. It wasn't about strength anymore, it was about fear. And fear is contagious. Word of a fire-wielding army would spread to the next town before the soldiers even arrived. Families would flee, markets would shut, and leaders would surrender before a fight began. Fire won battles before they started. In this way, fire was not only a weapon, it was a messenger, a signal of what was to come. The stories of entire villages being burned alive weren't myths. They were warnings. And even in times of peace, people lived with the memory of what flame could do. A simple candle left burning. A torch knocked over in a crowded alley. These things carried the same dread as an enemy army on the horizon. The fear of fire had seeped into the medieval psyche. You can see it in the art of the time. In the illuminated manuscripts, hell is always depicted in red and orange. Souls burn. Demons carried torches. The ultimate punishment was always eternal fire. That wasn't just religious metaphor, it was real. They had seen what fire could do to a body, what it could do to hope. Entire cities were rebuilt after fire, but people were never the same. And the psychological impact went beyond the battlefield. Fire was used in executions. It was the punishment reserved for heretics and witches. Being burned at the stake became the most horrifying sentence a person could imagine. These public executions served a dual purpose. They eliminated the accused and also reminded everyone watching, this is what happens when you cross power. Fire was fear incarnate. It silenced rebellion. It burned evidence. It rewrote memory. And because fire destroyed so completely, it left no room for argument. Once something was burned, it could not be recovered. That finality made it powerful. But in the hands of men, it also became dangerous. Too many rulers used fire not as justice, but as spectacle. Too many wars were fought not to conquer land, but to burn what others had built. In doing so, fire turned from a tool of war into a symbol of dominance. The terrifying part is how easily it was spread. A spark. A torch. A single flame. That was all it took. And no one was immune. Whether you were a knight in shining armor or a child in a wooden hut, the fire treated you the same. The noble class built stone keeps to resist it, but even they knew once fire breached the defenses, it showed no mercy. And in that reality was the true fear. That even the strongest walls couldn't stop it. That even God's house could be consumed by it. That fire was beyond man's control. And perhaps that's why fire inspired not only fear but reverence. In medieval rituals, fire was also used to cleanse, to forge, to baptize. But these moments were solemn reminders that fire had power no one fully understood. When blacksmiths hammered red-hot blades, when priests lit candles for the dead, when peasants gathered around a hearth in the cold, there was always respect. They knew the fire gave, and it took. And so, the fear of fire became part of daily life. People carried it in their stories, their laws, their architecture. Stone replaced wood. Fire breaks were built into cities. Watchmen carried lanterns not just for light, but as a warning. Smoke was no longer just a signal of cooking or comfort. It was a threat. And yet, despite all efforts to contain it, fire kept returning to war. In the later Middle Ages, fire ships became a naval terror. These were vessels packed with flammable materials, set alight, and sent drifting into enemy fleets. Trapped sailors would either burn or leap into the sea. And on land, gunpowder was starting to appear. The introduction of cannons meant that fire would now be bound with metal. Explosions replaced hissing pots, but the fear remained the same. Now it came with a bang. And it never truly left. The fear of fire that gripped medieval warriors is the same fear we carry. Today, it's why we install smoke alarms. Why fire drills are mandatory. Why every society has some ritual, rule, or regulation about flame. Because once, not so long ago, fire wasn't just danger, it was war. It was punishment. It was silence and screams all at once. It's strange to think that something so small as spark could cause so much ruin. But in the Middle Ages, it did. Over and over again. And those centuries have passed, the fear of fire still lingers in our bones. Maybe not in the form of boiling oil or flaming arrows, but in the way we flinch at smoke, the way we respect the flame, the way we remember what it once did, and what it still could do.